Kian sat alone in the dim light of the space station's repair bay, his hands stained with grease and his eyes tired from a long day of work. The station was small, located on the outer rim of the galaxy, and the hours were long. The stars outside twinkled through the thick windows, their soft glow casting strange shadows across the floor. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still in most days. Kian barely had enough energy to finish his work before heading to his small quarters. He was a mechanic, skilled in fixing starships and equipment that most people on the station couldn't even understand. His life was simple, focusing on repairs and maintenance, with little room for excitement. But today felt different. There was an unusual hum in the air, something that made Kian's skin tingle. The station's radar was blinking more urgently than usual, and it wasn't long before the voice of the station's commander crackled. Over the intercom, "Attention all personnel. We have an unidentified vessel approaching. Prepare for possible landing. I repeat, prepare for possible landing." Kian's heart skipped a beat. Unidentified. That wasn't good. The outer rim was dangerous, a place where lawlessness and threats lurked in every corner of the galaxy. As much as he hated surprises, Kian knew his duty. He wiped his hands on a rag, grabbed his tools, and headed to the landing bay. The hallways of the station were quiet, with only the hum of machinery filling the air. Kian walked briskly, his boots echoing off the metal floors as he moved toward the landing zone. He passed a few engineers and officers, all moving quickly, but no one spoke. They knew what was coming. When he reached the landing bay, the first thing Kian noticed was the strange, almost unsettling silence. The air felt thick with tension. Through the thick glass windows of the landing bay, he saw a ship descending. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. It was sleek, almost like a long blade, and shimmered with an iridescent sheen that made it look like it was from another world. "Is it armed?" Kian asked, looking over at one of the officers standing by the control panel. The officer shook his head. "It's not showing any weapons, but I wouldn't bet on it." "Stay alert," Kian nodded, adjusting his grip on his tool belt, feeling a little uneasy. He had worked on many ships, but nothing like this. It was too advanced, too foreign. The ship touched down gently, its engines making a soft whirring sound before shutting off completely. The doors of the ship opened slowly, and Kian's eyes widened in surprise. Standing at the entrance was a woman unlike any he had ever seen before. She was tall, her skin a striking shade of green, with hair that seemed to shimmer in the light. Her eyes were bright, almost glowing, and they locked onto Kian's with an intensity that made him freeze in place. She stepped out of the ship with the grace of someone who was used to being in command. There was no hesitation in her movements, no doubt in the way she carried herself. Kian had heard stories of alien warriors, but none had prepared him for this moment. The woman's voice was calm but firm. "I'm Naira, of the Zorvian people. My ship has sustained damage. I need assistance." Kian stood there for a moment, not sure how to respond. His heart was pounding in his chest, and for a brief second, he wondered if he should just turn and run. But that wasn't who he was. He had a job to do. "I'm Kian. I can help you with the repairs," he stammered. "Follow me." Without a word, Naira followed him as they walked to the repair bay. Kian tried to keep his focus on the task at hand, but his mind was racing. He couldn't stop looking at her. Her presence was overwhelming, as if she carried an entire world with her. There was something about her, something that felt both dangerous and intriguing. Once they reached the repair bay, Naira moved toward the ship without hesitation, inspecting the damage with a sharp eye. Kian set to work, gathering his tools and preparing to make the necessary repairs. "You're not like the others here," Naira said, her voice breaking through the silence. Kian glanced up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Naira's eyes met his again, and he felt a strange sense of unease mixed with curiosity. "Most of the people here would fear me. I am a warrior, not someone they would trust. But you do not seem afraid." Kian didn't know how to respond. He wasn't sure if he should be afraid. She was, after all, an alien warrior, and he had no idea what her true intentions were. but something about her calm demeanor made him feel oddly at ease. "I've worked on all kinds of ships," Kian said, trying to sound more confident. "I'm used to dealing with strange technology." Naira tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You are not just a mechanic, are you?" Kian froze for a moment. How did she know? He wasn't just a mechanic, not really. He had always been more, but he had kept that side of himself hidden. He had been taught that it wasn't important to show strength, not when you were just fixing things. But Naira's gaze seemed to cut through all of that. "I'm not sure what you mean," Kian said, trying to steer the conversation back to the repairs. Naira seemed to smile, though it was more of a knowing expression than a friendly one. "I can see strength in you, Kian. Physical, yes, but more than that. Your mind is sharp. Your will is strong. You are the kind of being who can survive in a galaxy full of chaos." Kian felt a strange sensation rise in his chest, a mix of pride and confusion. He wasn't sure if she was complimenting him or sizing him up, but something told him that this wasn't just about fixing her ship anymore. Without warning, Naira spoke again, her voice low and steady. "You're strong enough to be my husband." Kian froze completely. His hand shook, and he had to grip the tool in his hand tightly to keep from dropping it. He had never been so caught off guard in his life. What had she just said? He looked at her, his mind racing. Was she serious? Had he heard her wrong? Naira simply stood there, waiting for his response, her expression unreadable. Kian stood frozen, his mind racing with disbelief. Naira, the powerful alien warrior who had just crash-landed in his station, had just said something he never expected. She had called him strong enough to be her husband. Her words echoed in his mind, leaving him unsure of what to say or do next. The silence between them grew longer as Kian tried to find his voice. He glanced at her, her piercing eyes still locked onto his. There was no hint of humor or mockery in her gaze, only seriousness. He couldn't tell if she was testing him or if she genuinely meant what she said. I don't think I understand." Kian finally stammered. "Why would you say that?" Naira tilted her head, studying him with a curious look. "In my world, strength is everything. It is the measure of who we are and what we can become. A strong warrior is respected, honored, and chosen to lead, to marry. I have seen strength in you, Kian, not just in your hands, but in your mind, your resolve. That is why I said you are strong enough." Kian blinked, his mouth dry. He had always considered himself strong in a practical way. He could lift heavy objects, fix complex machinery, and solve problems that seemed impossible. But he never thought of himself as someone with the strength of a warrior, especially not someone worthy of a powerful alien like Naira. "I'm just a mechanic," he said quietly. "I fix things. I'm not a warrior, not like you." Naira took a step closer, her presence overwhelming. "Strength is not always about fighting, Kian. It is about endurance, about overcoming challenges. You survived here, in this dangerous place, and that alone speaks of strength. You do not need to be a soldier to be worthy. I see that in you." Her words left Kian speechless. He had always seen himself as ordinary, just another worker on the station, nothing special. But here, before this alien warrior, his entire life suddenly felt small and unimportant. He had never thought about what strength truly meant, but now it seemed like something much larger than he had ever considered. "I'm not sure if I'm the right person for you," Kian said, shaking his head. I'm not like you." Naira's gaze softened, but her expression remained firm. "I do not seek a partner like myself. I seek one who can stand beside me, who can think for themselves, who can endure the hardships of this galaxy. A partner who will fight not with their fists, but with their heart." Kian took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. It was hard to believe what she was saying. He had always thought strength was about physical power, about muscle and fighting. But now, Naira was telling him that there was more to it than that. Much more. "What do you expect from me, then?" Kian asked, his voice quieter now. "What does it mean to be worthy in your eyes?" Naira gave him a small, knowing smile. "I do not expect you to be a warrior. I expect you to be yourself. But if you wish to truly understand what strength means, I will show you. You will need to prove yourself to me, Kian. Kian blinked, not sure what she meant. Prove myself? How? By accepting my challenge, Naira replied, her eyes gleaming with a spark of mischief. I will take you to a place where only those who possess true strength survive. It is not just a test of physical power, but of your mind, your spirit. If you can endure it, you will understand what it means to truly be strong. Kian felt a knot form in his stomach. He wasn't sure he was ready for anything like that. He had never faced a challenge like this before, but something in Naira's voice made him hesitate. Maybe it wasn't about fighting. Maybe it was about something deeper. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Kian admitted. I'm not a warrior. I don't know what you expect me to do. Naira's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. You do not need to be ready. Kian, the challenge will prepare you. It will test everything, your mind, your body, your will. Only those who can endure it are worthy of what comes after. But if you refuse, then you will never know what you are capable of. Kian stared at her for a moment, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He didn't want to disappoint her, and he didn't want to back down. He had always been the kind of person to take on challenges, even when they seemed impossible. This, however, was something entirely new. He wasn't sure he could do it, but the idea of backing away from Naira's challenge felt like a missed opportunity, a chance to prove that he wasn't just ordinary. He looked at Naira, his expression firming. All right, I'll do it. I'll take your challenge. Naira nodded, her eyes gleaming with approval. Good. You will learn what true strength is. With that, she led Kian out of the repair bay, and they moved toward the station's docking platform. As they walked through the long corridors, Kian couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What was this challenge going to be? He had no idea what to expect, but he was determined to give it his all. If he could prove something to Naira and to himself, it would be worth whatever lay ahead. They reached the docking platform, where Naira's ship stood silently. The atmosphere around them was different now. There was no chatter, no noise, just the hum of the station's engines in the background. You will need to board my ship, Naira said. We will travel to the heart of the galaxy's most dangerous asteroid field. There, you will face the trial. Kian's heart raced as they boarded the ship. The engine powered up, and the ship lifted off the platform. As they entered the cold void of space, Kian realized that there was no turning back. Whatever this trial was, it was going to change everything. And for the first time in his life, Kian wasn't sure if he was ready for it, but as the ship accelerated toward the unknown, he knew one thing for sure. This challenge would test more than just his strength. It would test his very soul. The journey through space was silent, the only sound being the low hum of Naira's ship. Kian sat quietly, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. His mind raced with questions, fears, and uncertainties. He had agreed to take on Naira's challenge. But now, as the ship moved further into deep space, he wasn't sure what to expect. The asteroid field that Naira had mentioned was notorious, and Kian wasn't sure how he could possibly survive. Whatever lay ahead, beside him, Naira sat in complete calm, her eyes focused on the control panel in front of her. She had the confidence of someone who had faced and conquered countless dangers, and Kian couldn't help but feel small in comparison. Her every movement seemed purposeful, every decision made with certainty. It was hard to imagine how someone like him could ever match her level of strength, both physical and mental. So, Kian finally broke the silence, his voice unsure. What exactly is this trial? What are we going to do? Naira glanced at him, her face unreadable. You will face the trial of endurance. It is not just a test of physical strength, Kian. It is about how well you can adapt to unexpected challenges, how you handle fear and uncertainty. It will push you to your limits. Kian frowned. He didn't know what she meant by adapt to challenges, but he could feel the weight of her words. He had always thought of strength as something physical, the ability to lift heavy things, fix machines, or survive a tough environment. But now Naira was telling him that strength went beyond that. I've never faced anything like this, Kian admitted. I mean, I've worked on ships and machinery my whole life, but nothing that requires mental toughness. I don't know if I have that. Naira's eyes softened slightly, though her voice remained firm. You do. You just don't realize it yet. Everyone has a different kind of strength. Yours is hidden beneath the surface. The trial will help you find it. Kian wasn't so sure. He had always considered himself ordinary. He didn't feel like someone with great potential for anything more than a mechanic's life. He had never thought of himself as a warrior, a leader, or someone capable of anything extraordinary. But Naira's confidence in him was hard to ignore, and part of him wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more to him than he had ever realized. As the ship hurtled deeper into space, Kian thought back to the moment when Naira had first spoken to him. You're strong enough to be my husband, she had said. At the time, it had seemed so strange, so impossible. But now, with every passing second, he felt a shift in himself. The way she spoke, the way she believed in him, made him question his own self-doubt. But that didn't mean he understood what she meant. Why do you see me that way? Kian asked suddenly. Why me? There are probably many stronger people out there. Why do you think I could be worthy of your trust? Naira paused, her fingers hovering over the controls. Then, without looking at him, she spoke. In my culture, strength is not just about physical power. It is about the ability to lead, to protect, to make decisions under pressure. A strong person is someone who can endure hardship without breaking. When I saw you, I saw a quiet strength in you. The way you approach problems, the way you think. That is the kind of strength I respect. Kian's heart beat faster at her words. She wasn't talking about muscle or fighting skill. She was talking about something deeper, something that Kian had never really thought about in himself. I don't think I'm that kind of person, Kian said, his voice almost a whisper. I've spent my life fixing things, making sure everything runs smoothly. But I've never been in a situation where I had to lead or fight for survival. I'm not sure I can be what you need. Naira finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. You do not need to be someone else, Kian. You only need to be yourself. The challenge will show you who you are beneath all the doubt. You will learn what it means to be truly strong. Kian nodded slowly, still uncertain. He wasn't sure if he could ever live up to her expectations. But he knew that backing out now would mean losing the chance to understand what Naira saw in him. The ship passed through the edge of the asteroid field. The stars outside became distant, and the space around them seemed darker. Kian could feel the tension building. The air in the ship felt heavy, as if it were preparing for something important to happen. Naira's voice broke through the stillness. We are almost there. The trial begins soon. Remember, Kian, this is not about winning or losing. It's about how you face the challenges ahead. Kian felt a knot form in his stomach. He wasn't sure what he was going to face, but it was clear that this trial would not be easy. As the ship entered the asteroid field, Kian's eyes widened. The field was a chaotic mess of floating rocks, some the size of small moons. The ship weaved through the asteroids, narrowly avoiding collision with the larger rocks that threatened to tear the vessel apart. The air inside the ship seemed to vibrate with the ship's rapid movements, and Kian had to grip the armrest tightly to steady himself. Get ready, Naira said, her voice steady. The first part of the trial is about to begin. Before Kian could react, the ship abruptly stopped, the sudden motion throwing him forward. The lights flickered, and the control panels blinked in and out of power. Kian barely had time to brace himself before the emergency alarms started blaring. Brace yourself, Naira commanded. We're going to be boarding an asteroid. There's no time to waste. Kian's heart raced. What did she mean? Boarding an asteroid? He didn't have time to think as Naira grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the back of the ship. The ship's rear hatch opened, and the cold, endless expanse of space greeted him. In the distance, a massive asteroid loomed, spinning slowly through the field. This is where the challenge begins, Naira said. You must make it across the surface of the asteroid. There are obstacles, dangers, and limited resources. You must survive. Kian's breath caught in his throat. This was real. This was happening. There was no turning back. Kian's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped onto the surface of the asteroid. The cold vacuum of space surrounded him, and the air in his suit felt thin and sharp. Naira was already ahead, moving confidently across the uneven surface of the asteroid, her steps short and steady. Kian hesitated for a moment before following her, his boots making soft thuds as they connected with the rocky ground. The asteroid was massive, its surface rugged and jagged. Kian's eyes scanned the landscape, searching for anything that could be a sign of danger. Large rocks and boulders littered the ground, some of them so big they blocked his path. There was no telling what kind of obstacles lay ahead. Naira had told him that this would be a test of endurance, not just strength. She had warned him about the dangers of the asteroid field, but he hadn't fully understood what she meant until now. The ground beneath him was unstable, and every step felt like it could lead to a new challenge. "We need to reach the top," Naira called out from ahead. "There's a shelter at the peak. That's where you'll find the next phase of the trial." Kian nodded, trying to keep up with her. His breath was heavy in his chest, and his legs felt like lead. He wasn't used to this kind of physical exertion. He had always been a mechanic, skilled with tools and machines, not with physical challenges. But now, as the cold winds of space whipped past him, Kian realized that this was more than just about reaching the top. This was about proving to himself that he could endure. They continued upward, the rocky terrain growing steeper with each step. Kian's muscles burned, and his hands scraped against the rough surface as he climbed. The higher they went, the more difficult it became to keep his footing. Loose rocks tumbled down from above, and the sound of them echoing in the stillness of space was unnerving. Naira, however, seemed unfazed. She moved like a force of nature, her body moving with the precision and grace of someone who had faced countless trials. Kian found himself both awed and frustrated by her ease. He knew he wasn't like her, but that didn't mean he couldn't try to push himself further. "This is harder than I thought," Kian admitted, gasping for air. "I didn't realize how much effort this would take." Naira turned her head, her eyes glinting with understanding. "It is not just about the body, Kian. It is about your mind, your will. The physical challenge is just a part of it. You must learn to push through the pain, to silence the doubts. Only then will you understand what true strength is." Kian nodded, though it was hard to quiet the voice in his head that told him to give up. He felt out of place, like he was trying to fit into a world that wasn't meant for him. But Naira had seen something in him, something he wasn't sure he understood yet. Maybe, just maybe, this challenge was his chance to discover that part of himself. They reached a narrow ledge halfway up the asteroid, and Kian stopped to catch his breath. His arms ached, and his legs trembled from the effort. The winds picked up, pulling at his suit, and he felt a cold chill run through him. Naira didn't stop. She continued moving, her focus unwavering. "We must keep moving, Kian," she called back to him. "The trial will not wait for you to rest. You must fight against your limits." Kian gritted his teeth. He couldn't let her down. She believed in him, even if he wasn't sure he believed in himself. With a deep breath, he pushed off the ledge and followed her again, moving with more determination this time. His pace was slower, but each step felt more deliberate, more focused. As they neared the top, the atmosphere changed, the wind grew stronger, and the rocks became sharper, more jagged. Kian stumbled several times, nearly losing his footing as he climbed over the uneven surface. His fingers were raw from gripping the rocks, and his breathing was shallow. But Naira didn't slow down. She was always one step ahead, her movements fluid and precise. Kian was beginning to feel the weight of his doubt. Was he really capable of completing this trial? He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't even close to being like Naira. He didn't have her confidence, her strength, or her experience. But then he remembered what she had said. This trial was not just about physical strength. It was about enduring, about pushing through the challenges and finding the strength within himself. He could do this. He had to. With renewed resolve, Kian pushed himself harder. The top of the asteroid was in sight, a small plateau where the shelter lay. But as he reached for the last few steps, A large rock loosened from above and tumbled down toward him. Kian's heart raced as he saw it coming. It was too big to dodge, and he was too exhausted to move fast enough. Without thinking, he threw himself to the side, rolling across the rocky ground as the rock crashed down behind him. His body screamed in protest, but Kian forced himself to stand. He had survived. He had reacted, adapted, and moved when it counted. For the first time, he realized that he wasn't just surviving. He was learning. Nyra, who had already reached the shelter, turned back and watched him. Her expression was unreadable, but Kian could see a glimmer of approval in her eyes. "Well done," she said quietly. "You have passed the first part of the trial." Kian collapsed onto the ground beside her, gasping for air. His body was sore, and his head spun from the exertion. But he had made it. He had faced the challenge and survived. "You were right," Kian said, looking up at her. It wasn't just about the body. It was about pushing through, about not giving up. Nyra nodded, her gaze softening slightly. "Strength is not about the fight, Kian. It is about the will to continue, to move forward, no matter the obstacle. You are stronger than you think." Kian smiled. Though it was small and tired, he had passed the first test, but there was more to come. He didn't know what the next phase of the trial would bring, but he felt something stirring inside him. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to believe in himself after all. The shelter at the top of the asteroid was small but sturdy, a simple structure designed to withstand the harsh conditions of space. Kian stepped inside, his body sore and exhausted from the climb. The cold wind outside had cut through his suit, and his muscles were aching from the effort. But the moment he entered the shelter, the warmth from the small heating unit was a welcome relief. Nyra was already inside, kneeling on the ground and inspecting a small device. She looked up as Kian entered, her expression calm but serious. "You did well, Kian," she said, her voice steady. "You passed the first part of the trial. But the real test begins now." Kian wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to catch his breath. He felt a sense of accomplishment, but he knew that Nyra wasn't one to give praise easily. There had to be more ahead, something even harder than what he had just faced. "What's next?" Kian asked, trying to hide the nervousness in his voice. Nyra stood up, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked toward the sky through the small window of the shelter. "We've passed the physical test, but now you must face your true challenge. It is not just about surviving the asteroid field. You will face an enemy." Kian frowned. "An enemy? Who?" Nyra turned toward him, her gaze steady and serious. "A group of raiders. They've been tracking us since we entered this system. They are ruthless, skilled in combat, and they won't hesitate to attack. You must be ready." Kian's stomach tightened. He had no experience with fighting or facing enemies. He had always been a mechanic, someone who fixed things, not someone who dealt with dangerous situations like this. But as Nyra spoke, he could see the seriousness in her eyes. This was no time to hesitate. If he wanted to pass the trial, he would have to face whatever was coming. "What do we do?" Kian asked, his voice more confident than he felt. Nyra walked over to a table where a few weapons lay. She picked up a small blaster and handed it to Kian. "You will defend yourself," she said. "I will show you how to use this, but you must understand, this is not about killing. This is about protecting yourself, about making decisions under pressure." Kian took the blaster in his hand, feeling its weight. He had never held a weapon before, and the idea of using it made him uneasy. But he knew this was part of the trial, and he couldn't back down now. He had to learn. Nyra's hands moved swiftly as she demonstrated how to aim and fire. "The blaster is simple. Point and shoot. But remember, your goal is not to kill. It is to incapacitate, to stop them without unnecessary violence." Kian nodded, trying to focus. It felt strange to be holding the weapon, but he could see the logic in what Nyra was saying. He had to survive, but he didn't need to become someone he wasn't in the process. "We don't have much time," Nyra said, her voice turning urgent. "The raiders are closing in. We need to move quickly." Kian followed her outside the shelter, his heart pounding in his chest. The asteroid field was a dangerous place, and the thought of facing raiders in this unforgiving environment made his stomach churn. But he couldn't back out now. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. Naira led him to a small ridge where they could see the enemy ships approaching in the distance. The raiders' vessels were dark, sleek, and menacing, moving fast through the asteroid field. They had tracked Naira's ship and followed them to the asteroid. Kian felt a chill run down his spine as he realized just how close the threat was. Stay low. Naira ordered, "We need to take them by surprise. Wait for my signal." Kian crouched behind a large rock, his heart racing as he watched the raiders' ships draw closer. He could hear the faint hum of their engines in the distance, growing louder as they approached. The air was tense, and Kian couldn't help but wonder if he was ready for this. He had never fought anyone before. He had no idea how to protect himself. But then he remembered Naira's words. It's about decisions under pressure. This wasn't about fighting for the sake of fighting. It was about surviving, about using his mind to find a way out. The raiders' ships landed with a heavy thud, their engines powering down as they disembarked. Kian could see the figures emerging from the ships, their movements swift and precise. They were armed, ready for a fight. Naira looked at Kian, her eyes intense. "When I give the signal, you take the shot. Don't hesitate." Kian's palms were sweaty as he gripped the blaster tighter. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to hurt anyone. But he knew he had no choice. This was the trial, and he had to face it head on. Naira moved quickly, her body blending with the shadows as she circled around the raiders. Kian stayed low, watching her every move. She was like a ghost, moving silently and with purpose. He had to be just as focused, just as calm. Then, Naira gave the signal, a quick nod of her head. Kian raised the blaster, aiming carefully. He had no idea if he could hit the target, but he didn't have time to think. He pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, hitting one of the raiders square in the chest. The figure collapsed to the ground, incapacitated but alive. Kian's heart pounded in his chest. It had worked. The raider was down. But the others were still coming. Kian's hand shook, but he knew he had to keep going. He fired again, hitting another raider. The second one fell, but there were still more. Kian's mind raced as he searched for a way out, a way to escape without getting caught. He couldn't do this alone. He needed Nyra moving quickly, taking down to more raiders with precision. She was fast, her movements fluid and efficient. Kian felt a rush of admiration for her. But there was no time to focus on that. The raiders were still coming. Stay close. Naira called out, pulling Kian to his feet. "We need to retreat." Kian followed her, his heart still racing. The blaster felt heavy in his hand, but he couldn't stop now. He had to keep going. They ran toward the shelter, dodging blaster fire from the remaining raiders. As they reached the shelter, Kian could hear the raiders yelling behind them. But Naira's speed and precision kept them at bay. They had survived the first wave. But Kian knew this wasn't over. There would be more to come. The sound of the raiders' ships faded into the distance as Kian and Naira took refuge inside the shelter. The cold wind of the asteroid field howled outside, but inside, the small space was warm and quiet. Kian leaned against the wall, his breathing heavy, his hands still trembling from the fight. He hadn't expected the confrontation to be so intense. The adrenaline was still coursing through his veins, and his mind raced, replaying every moment of the battle. Naira was seated across from him, her expression unreadable. She wasn't out of breath, and she didn't seem shaken at all. She was calm, as always. But there was something different about her now. She had fought alongside him, guided him, and protected him. There was a bond forming between them, one that Kian hadn't expected but couldn't deny. They had faced danger together and come out alive. "You did well, Kian," Naira said. Breaking the silence, her voice was calm, but there was a note of approval in it that Kian couldn't ignore. Kian looked up at her, still trying to catch his breath. "I'm not sure I did. I didn't expect it to be like that." Naira gave a small smile, her eyes softening slightly. "You faced fear and danger. You made decisions under pressure, and you survived. That is what matters." Kian looked down at his hands. They were still shaking, but now, instead of fear, he felt something else, a sense of accomplishment. He had faced something he thought was impossible, and he had made it through. He wasn't a warrior, but he had fought, and he had learned something about himself in the process. I never thought I'd be in a situation like that, Kian admitted. I've spent my whole life fixing things, not fighting. Naira's gaze was steady, as always. You've learned that strength comes in many forms, Kian. You are not a warrior, but you have something just as important, resilience. That is what will carry you through the challenges ahead, Kian nodded. Though he wasn't entirely sure he believed her, he still felt like an outsider in this world of warriors and danger. But part of him had changed during the battle. He had made choices, acted when he needed to, and survived. Maybe that was enough for now. Do you ever get scared? Kian asked, surprising himself. It wasn't something he had thought about before, but now, sitting here with Naira, he couldn't help but wonder. She was so confident, so sure of herself. Did she ever feel the way he did? Naira looked at him for a moment, and then, for the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. Yes, she said softly, but fear is a tool, Kian. It sharpens the mind, makes you aware of the risks. It doesn't control me. It makes me more focused. Kian thought about her words. It made sense. Fear wasn't something to be avoided. It was something to be understood and used. In that moment, he realized that he had always been afraid of failure, of not being good enough. But fear didn't have to stop him. It could push him forward, make him stronger. I think I understand, Kian said slowly. Fear doesn't have to stop me. It can make me stronger. Naira gave a slight nod, her eyes approving. Exactly. You are learning, Kian. That is what this trial is about. Learning who you truly are. Discovering your strength. There was a long pause as Kian absorbed her words. He felt different now, more grounded. The fear from the battle had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence he hadn't known. He had faced an enemy and survived, but he had also learned about himself in a way he hadn't expected. He wasn't the same person who had first arrived on the asteroid. But Naira's words weren't just about strength. They were about something deeper, something that Kian hadn't fully grasped until now. She wasn't just teaching him how to fight or survive. She was teaching him how to live, to make decisions, to face fear, and to trust himself. We need to keep moving, Naira said suddenly, standing up and stretching. This trial is not over yet. Kian stood with her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He wasn't sure what came next, but he knew one thing. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first stepped onto the asteroid. He had changed, and that change had been hard, but it had made him stronger. The moment they stepped outside the shelter, the wind hit them with a sharp, biting cold. The asteroid's surface was just as unforgiving as before, but now, Kian didn't feel the same sense of dread. He had faced the raiders, and he had faced his own fears. He had learned something valuable about survival, yes, but also about himself. He had resilience, and that, he realized, was something no one could take away from him. As they continued their journey, Naira led the way, her steps short and unwavering. Kian followed closely behind, his mind still processing everything he had learned. He didn't know what the future held, but he felt more prepared than he had ever been before. Naira glanced back at him, her expression unreadable as always, but there was something in her eyes, something approving. She didn't need to say anything. Kian knew what she was thinking. He had passed the test, not just the trial of strength, but the trial of the mind, the spirit. The path ahead was uncertain, and there would be more challenges. But Kian knew now that he wasn't facing them alone. Naira had become more than just a teacher. She had become a partner, and with that partnership, Kian felt the strength he hadn't known he had. Together, they would face whatever came next, and Kian was ready. He had learned to trust himself, and that was the most important lesson of all. The days passed slowly after the trial with the raiders. Kian had learned so much about himself, more than he had ever thought possible. His muscles were sore, his body aching, but his mind was clearer than it had ever been. He no longer feared. The unknown, the uncertainty that once consumed him had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. As Naira and Kian continued their journey across the asteroid, the bond between them grew stronger. It wasn't just the battles they had faced together. It was something deeper. They had shared moments of vulnerability, pushed each other to the limits, and come out on the other side stronger. There was a mutual respect between them, a silent understanding that had been forged in the heat of battle. Kian had never imagined that he would form such a connection with anyone, let alone with someone like Naira. She was everything he wasn't: confident, strong, and unshakable. But she had seen something in him, a resilience he hadn't recognized in himself, in return. Kian had started to see the depth of Naira's strength. It wasn't just physical power. It was the strength to keep moving forward even when everything around her seemed to fall apart. They had arrived at the edge of the asteroid field, where the stars glittered in the vastness of space. The quiet, cold beauty of the scene took Kian's breath away. It felt like they were at the edge of the universe, far from everything they had ever known. And yet, for the first time, Kian didn't feel alone. He had Naira beside him. "We're almost there," Naira said, her voice calm but full of purpose. "The final part of the trial awaits." Kian looked at her, his heart pounding. They had faced so much already: the raiders, the climb, the fight. He had pushed his limits, and now, it seemed, the trial was nearing its end. He wasn't sure what was coming next, but he felt ready. He had learned how to endure, how to trust himself, and most importantly, how to trust her. But there was still something weighing on his mind, something he hadn't been able to shake. Naira's words from the beginning echoed in his thoughts: "You're strong enough to be my husband." Kian had never been one to think about marriage, let alone with an alien warrior. It felt like something from another life, another world. And yet, the more time he spent with Naira, the more he began to understand what she had meant. It wasn't just about strength. It was about partnership, trust, and mutual respect. He had never felt such a deep connection with anyone before, not even with the people from his own world. "Naira," Kian began, his voice hesitant, "I've been thinking about what you said before, about being strong enough to be your husband. I'm not sure I understand exactly what you meant. I don't know what it means to be a husband in your world." Naira turned to face him, her eyes soft but focused. "I never meant for you to understand right away, but I see now that you are starting to understand. A husband is someone who stands beside me, not just in times of peace, but in times of war, in times of hardship. It is not about having power over each other. It is about balance, strength, and weakness. Courage and fear, both are necessary." Kian felt the weight of her words. It was clear now that she wasn't asking for someone to be a warrior like her. She was asking for someone to walk beside her, to face the challenges of life together. It wasn't about dominance or submission. It was about partnership. "I don't know if I'm ready for all that," Kian admitted, his voice uncertain. "I've spent my life just fixing things, not making decisions like that. I'm not a warrior, Naira. I don't know if I can be what you need." Naira smiled, though there was no pity in her eyes. "You are more than you realize, Kian. You have already shown me the strength you carry inside. It is not about what you are, but what you become. And what you are becoming is someone who can stand with me, not behind me, not in front of me, but beside me." Kian's heart raced, and he found himself searching her eyes for any sign of doubt. But there was none. Naira believed in him. "We've been through so much together," Kian said slowly, "and I've seen the kind of strength you have. I've seen what it takes to be who you are. I don't know if I can ever be like you, but I want to try. I want to be worthy of what you see in me." Naira stepped closer, her presence overwhelming yet comforting. "You already are, Kian. That's why I trust you." For a moment, the air between them was thick with unspoken understanding. Kian could feel the weight of her words settling deep. Within him, he wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that he couldn't walk away from it. He had changed, and Naira had changed him. He was no longer the man who had arrived on the asteroid, unsure of his place in the universe. He had found his strength, his purpose, and now, perhaps, he was ready for something more. "I'm ready," Kian said, his voice stronger now, "not just for the trial, but for whatever comes after. I don't know if I'm the man you thought I was, but I'm ready to be the man who stands beside you." Naira reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was firm, but there was a softness to it that Kian hadn't expected. "You already are," she said quietly. And that is enough. For the first time in his life, Kian felt at peace. The trials, the battles, the challenges, they had all led to this moment. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was something more, something he couldn't quite put into words. He was ready to face whatever the universe had in store, with Naira by his side. The stars above them seemed to shine brighter, as if acknowledging the bond that had been forged between them. The asteroid field, once a place of danger and uncertainty, now felt like home. Kian turned to Naira, a quiet smile spreading across his face. "So, what now?" Naira returned the smile, her eyes gleaming with a sense of finality. "Now, we move forward together. The trial may be over, but our journey is just beginning." And with that, they walked forward side by side, ready to face whatever came next, together.